Hey everybody, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's YouTube channel. First of all, I want to thank you for watching this video. And remember that this channel doesn't do Patreon. Instead, we sell our digital courses down below. And every single dollar that we get from the products you buy below goes into making more content. The best way to help out this channel and Mammoth Interactive is to subscribe to Mammoth Interactive's huge library of content. Get thousands of hours and hundreds of courses for a low price down below. We have a monthly option and a yearly option. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the video.
Naturally, the first step whenever you're going to start a new Unity project is to make a new project in the Unity interface. So we're going to open Unity. We're going to press the new button right here in the top right corner, and then we're going to set the project name, which is going to be Steering Behaviors. The location of this project is going to be under my home folder, then /projects. This helps you a lot in the effort of not mixing up files in different folders. I think it's much better doing it like this than just using projects into desktop folders. It's just going to get things messy. We're also going to set the project mode to 2D. You could start with 3D mode and internally change it to 2D in Unity, but it's just better to start with this set right from the beginning. After this is complete, we're going to disable Unity Analytics. It's not required. And then we're going to press Create Project and just sit back and wait for a little bit. The first step here is to make sure we have the same Unity layout. So we are going to have the same appearance, the same as in the recording as to what you have in your Unity version. Okay? So once we are here, we're going to the top right of the Unity editor. We click on Layout, and then we're going to select Default. There might be some resizing, some windows are going to appear, and other ones are going to disappear, but in the end we're going to have more or less the same look. Okay? And the reason we do this first lesson, it's always to make sure we're in the same page. And to make sure we are going to have a good start, we need to make a good folder structure and a good hierarchy structure. Okay? This is something you have to worry about whenever you start a new project. It's not exactly necessary, but this is one of those things that you just learn by experience. If you have a good start, you're going to have a good development process. So here in the Assets folder, we're going to right-click, choose Create, select Folder, and we're going to name this project. Some people think this is not necessary because, well, we are already making our own project, but whenever you add third-party assets like 3D models and audio and maybe background music, these files, they're going to appear by default in the root of your project. So if you make a project folder, you're going to avoid having some conflicts. Maybe you make some scripts here and that third-party assets import scripts with the same names. There would be some overwritten operations happening, and that's just going to lead to some headaches for you. So to avoid that, just make a project folder, and everything you create in this project is going to be here. And it's a good idea to make a few other folders. So we're going to start with Scenes. We're going to make a new one here called Scripts, like this. We're going to make another one called Prefabs. And while we make this project, whenever new folders are needed, we're just going to add them here. Let's just start with these three. Okay? So now that we have these three folders, we want to add some third-party assets. In this course, whenever you are watching it, there's going to be a zip file called Steering Behaviors Assets. This is going to contain everything third-party related to this project, just to help you in the efforts of making beautiful experiences, adding assets and adding particle effects and things like this. So I'm going to copy the zip file, and then we're going to right click in the Assets folder in Unity and choose Reveal in Finder or in Explorer. It depends on what operating system you're using. So it's going to take you straight to the Assets folder of your project, whenever it is. Here we're going to paste that zip file. So we have the steering behavior assets here. We're going to extract its contents. In macOS you can just double click, but if you are on Windows you can right click and choose extract. Then I'm going to get rid of the zip file, and that's pretty much what we need for now. A project folder and our steering behaviors folder. Assets, okay? Let me just rename this to steering behaviors assets. It's going to be more explicit. So we go back to Unity, and then we're going to wait a few seconds for all of the assets to be processed. We're going to have sprite sheets, we're going to have isolated images, we're going to have background assets, some audio, some fonts. So it takes a few seconds, but eventually it's going to be right here. Okay. Inside the steering behaviors assets folder, you're going to see the space shooter folder, and this has been downloaded from Kenny. Okay, you're going to have the license here. It's public domain. You can use it for personal and commercial projects, and if you want, you can give a visit to kenny.nl. They provide great assets for free, and they have some tools you can also download. So it's interesting to take a look. Okay. There is also an image here. It's a preview image showing some of the assets you can use. Okay, and as you can tell, we're going to make a space game here. It's going to make our lives easier to just wander in outer space. Okay, and there is also a sample of how these assets might look when you put them all together in a scene, and you can make a fun game. Okay, so that's pretty much what we need for adding these third-party assets. And now we're going to deal with our scene. Okay, as usual in Unity, the scene is where everything is going to happen. Either you're making a simple menu, or if you're making the entire game logic here. The way I make games, I like to think about the hierarchy of things here. And the thing that I like to do first is to create a game scene controller. It's going to be a game object that's going to contain pretty much everything related to your game. Your camera, your player, bullets, enemies. And it's going to oversee the entire game. This is going to allow us to verify if the game is over, if the player won, if they were destroyed, then we can send messages. It's going to be a connection between the game elements and the entire game. So here in the hierarchy, I'm going to right click, choose create empty, and rename this game object to game scene controller, like this. Let's make sure its position is going to be 0, 0, and 0. Okay. If you click on this movement tool here, the move tool, you're going to see that it's going to be centered with the camera. I'm going to get the main camera here, drag and drop inside the game scene controller. Okay. So for now, this is all we're going to have: the game scene controller and the main camera. You notice that the scene name here is untitled, and there is an asterisk because it means we changed things and we didn't save these changes. So let's go ahead and do it. We go to File, Save Scene As, then we're going to the Assets folder, Project, Scenes, and I'm going to save the scene as Game, just like this. I'm going to press Save. And if you look at the scenes folder inside Unity, you're going to see our game.unity file, which is this scene. That's pretty much empty for now, but we're going to feed it with new things in the next lessons. Okay? So make sure that after every lesson you save your scene, you save your project, okay, just to make sure every change has been saved. And let's move on to the next video. We now have a blank project we can work with. If you look at the game window, right now, if you just click here in the game tab, you're just going to see this blue image, which means that there's nothing going on in this specific scene. Since we're making a ship game, so if it's something that takes place in space, it's interesting to show a few stars here. And the good thing about this space shooter asset package by Kenny is that if you go to a certain folder here, if you go to backgrounds folder, you're going to see 4 different patterns for the sky. Okay, there's black, blue, dark purple, and purple. So these can be used as our game background. Okay, so how exactly are we supposed to use this background? You can go to the game scene controller, right click, select 2D object, and then sprite. Okay, you're going to add a simple sprite here. I'm going to rename this new sprite to background, like this. Then we need to add a sprite here. So I'm just going to drag this blue image here and drop here in the sprite field, so you can see this asset here. Now, since this is a background asset, we don't want this to be rendered on top of anything else, like the ships and bullets that we might add in the future. So it's interesting for you to go to order in layer here where it says 0 and put a negative number like minus 100. Okay? It doesn't matter what number you use here. It can be something huge like this. Okay? The thing is, the thing that matters is the order of these numbers. So if you have this as minus 100 and you have a ship with the order in layer 10, for example, since 10 is greater than minus 100, it's going to be rendered on top of the background. Since every sprite you add is going to have the order in layer set to 0 by default, then if you set this to negative, no accidents are going to happen. Now, there are different ways to make this background to fill the entire screen. The easiest of them is to just go to the scene window, select the scale tool, which is this one. You click on this white circle and then you just increase it like this. It's going to fit the entire screen. But you're going to kind of deform this image. It's not a good idea to scale sprites too much or scale at all. So the good thing about Unity is that we can change how this image is going to be rendered. You're going to see that the draw mode here is set to simple, but you can change this to tiled. Okay, and whenever you do this, you need to make sure that the image that's being used, which is blue.png, is going to have its mode set to full rect. Okay, so we go to blue here, then let's check here. Let's remember what is the setting that we have to change. So here in mesh type, it's set to tight, but we're going to set it to full rect. Once you change it to full rect, we press the apply button. We can go to the background image here, and then we can change the size of this sprite. Notice that it's not being deformed. It's repeating itself, okay, like this. So instead of using 2.56, let's use that multiplied by 10. Same thing here, multiplied by 10. Unity is going to calculate the size automatically for you. Okay, so if you go to the scene window, you're going to see that the background is going to fit inside this entire space without having any deform operations happening here. Okay, so the lesson here is whenever you deal with sprites that should be tiled, let's make sure we set its type, its mesh type, to full rect. Then its sprite is going to be tiled, and then we can set its size like this without having any deformations. Okay, so since we started working with sprites, it's now time to add our player to this scene. Right now, we're going to save the scene, save the project, and move on to the next lesson. The player is going to be the most important thing in this game. Even though we are going to learn a lot about steering behaviors, the player is going to be the main reason you're going to have fun, because you're going to control something, which is going to be our spaceship, and, well, it's going to lead the entire gameplay logic. So to add a player, we're not going to do what we did with the background. We just added a sprite renderer, and that's it. We did this because this is going to be something static. It's not going to have any special logic assigned here. It's just an image that's going to be displayed below everything else. The player, however, is going to have a logic assigned to it because we're going to listen for key presses. We're going to make the player move towards different places of this world, okay, things like this. So because of that, we have to have an extra care. We need to make a good hierarchy for this player and for any game element you make. It's going to make your lives much easier. So in the game scene controller, we're going to right click. Instead of adding a 2D object, we're just going to select create empty. It's going to make an empty game object, position 0, rotation 0, scale 1, and I'm going to rename this game object to player. Okay? If you go to the scene window, you're going to see that the player is going to be centered here. Now, I'm going to right-click player, choose create empty, and rename this to container. And finally, right-click container, choose to the object, and then select sprite. Okay, this is the moment we add our visuals for the player. We're finally going to add the sprite here. Okay. The reason we do this is going to be much clearer for you later, but the player game object is going to control the logic, and the container is going to control the visuals. You can separate logic from visuals. I'm going to rename this new sprite to just sprite, and we're going to the spacesuit folder, PNG, and let's choose one good player ship that's going to contrast well to this scene. Let's choose the blue one, okay? I'm going to select player ship 1 and drag and drop here. If you look at the game window, well, we already have our player ship. That's it. One thing I want you to do, though, is to select the container, or rather than this, select the sprite, and let's rotate this sprite in the z-axis to -90 degrees. Okay, so it's going to be pointing here. Right. The reason I'm doing this is because I always want the sprites to be pointing right. This is going to make several rotation calculations easier for us, because this is the angle 0. Okay. Notice one interesting thing here. We are in the scene window. I have the player selected and I have the move to selected. This red arrow is the x-axis. This is going to be kind of the front of our player. If you click on the sprite, though, the red axis is going to be pointing down because we rotated the sprite. Even though we rotated the sprite, even though the right of the sprite is pointing down, the right of the player is pointing to the right. This is one of the important reasons for you to make a good hierarchy. Okay, we don't need to worry about how the container is working at all. We don't need to worry about rotations, scales, positions. The player is still as it came. Position 0, rotation 0, scale 1. Okay, that's pretty much what you have to do here, visually speaking. And now we have to control this player. Whenever you want to simulate your game, whenever you want to play and see how it's going to look like in mobile devices and consoles, you just press the play button and you have this, an empty screen, nothing special is happening here. Okay, so now we need to improve this a little bit. So the player is going to have its own script, its own logic. We're going to the project folder, scripts. We're going to right click here, choose create, and then C# script. The name of this is just going to be player. We hit enter, wait for the code to be processed, and then we need to add the script we just created as a component of this game object. So we select the player game object, drag and drop the player here, and then we double click to open it in our favorite editor. Okay, so let's wait just a little bit for this to open, just a few seconds, and once it's complete, we're going to work with our file here. I'm just going to zoom a little bit, and there we go. Player, we have the start method, and we have the update method. To control the player, we have different ways of implementing this, okay, to make the player move up, down, left, and right. One of the easiest ways to basically control the player is to use Unity's input system. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, and then go to Input, you're going to see that we have multiple axes. It's like, imagine you're holding a gamepad right now from PlayStation or an Xbox. We have two sticks, okay, for horizontal movement and maybe for looking, and we have several buttons for firing, jumping, doing things like this. Unity is going to give you a vertical and a horizontal axis that can be used along with the buttons left, right, okay, which are the left and right keys from your keypad, and we also have A and D, which is used a lot in first-person shooter games. The vertical axis is going to have up, down, the up and down arrow keys, and S and W, also used in lots of first-person shooter games and arcade games. So it's a good idea to just use what's built here. Okay, so these axes are going to return values between 1 and -1. 1 if they are all the way to one direction. So the horizontal axis is going to return 1 if you are tilting it to the right, and -1 to the left, and 0 if it's not being used at all. So this allows you to implement, to allow the usage of certain smoothness. Okay, you can move full speed, you can move half speed if you are on a gamepad. Okay, and also if you press and release the keys, there's going to be a smoothness going on into moving from one value, like 1 and -1, towards 0. You're going to see this in practice. So first of all, we want to know what is the horizontal value being used. I'm going to type float horizontal, and that's going to be input dot get axis, and between parentheses the string horizontal. Make sure you type it exactly like this, as it has to be the same name is what's written here. Now we do the same thing for the vertical. Float vertical is going to be input.getAxis, and between parentheses the string vertical, like this. I think this X value and Y value to get used to these characters. And now if you want to check what values are being stored here, we're going to print a message to our console. So we're going to type debug.log, open parenthesis, X value plus white space, like this, plus Y value. Now we're going to save this script. Let's move back to Unity. Make sure the script is here. And after the script compilation is done, we're going to press the play button and look at our console. Okay, so let's wait. There we go, console. So we're just printing 0, 0. You can also look here if you want. I'm going to press the right key now. And notice here that it slowly moved all the way up to 1. I'm going to release the right key. It's going to move back to 0. Let me just remove this collapse here. So all the way back to 0. Left key, -1. Release, 0, 0. Now the up key, 1. Release 0. Down key, -1. Release 0. The WASD keys can also be used, and they can be used simultaneously, like this. I can press 2 at the same time. So the horizontal and vertical axis can work independently into making the player move. Okay, and the good thing that these values are used as 1, -1, and 0 is that we can multiply that by anything and scale how fast the player is going to move through space. Okay, so let's work on moving the player. We're going to clear the console here, select the player game object. We're going to click Add Component, and we're going to search for Rigid Body 2D. This is going to come with a lot of physical attributes here that we're not going to exactly use in this game, but it's going to bring an entire velocity updating logic along with it. So it's something extremely useful for us. Everything you have to do after you add a rigid body here is to just remove the gravity scale. Instead of 1, let's use 0, because we are in space. If you use 1, well, the ship would just fall down, and it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so this is going to happen. Not what we want to do. Okay, so gravity scale is going to be 0. So if you press play, the player is going to stand still in the middle of the space. Okay, after this is complete, we need to get a reference to this rigid body so we can manipulate its velocity. So here in the player, we're going to add 2 fields. We're going to add a public float speed. This is going to be how fast the player is going to move. And I'm also going to add a private rigid body 2D player rigid body. Why this is public and why this is private? This is public because this is something that we can change in the Unity editor. Okay, so you don't need to change this code and go to Unity and wait for the compilation to be done to change the speed value. It's just going to be visible in the Unity editor. Now this doesn't need to be visible because we can fetch this rigid body only by using code. There's no need to go to the Unity editor for this. So the way we're going to get this play rigid body value is going to the start method and typing play rigid body is going to be game object. So we're going to access the game object where the player component is, dot get component of type rigid body 2D, this one, okay, you write it that way, and then a semicolon. So we have a reference to the player's rigid body. And now, just by doing that, we can already change the player's velocity. Here, in the update method, when we get the x and y values, we're going to type player rigid body dot velocity is going to be a new vector 2. Okay, vector 2 because it's going to be a value which has an x component and a y component, horizontal and vertical. The x value is going to be x value multiplied by speed, and the vertical one is going to be y value multiplied by speed. That's why I told you this is very good. It's very good to have this value changing between -1, 0, and 1. If you multiply it by 5, for example, it's going to change between -5, 0, and 5. so you can make the ship as fast as you want. Okay, now we're going to save this script. Let's go to Unity. Make sure that when the code is done, you look at the player's component here. Speed is set to 0, so we can just change this to 5. Now that we saved this, now that we set this to 5, we're going to press play. Okay, wait a little bit. We're going to have the player here, and then we can move the player whatever we want, like this, okay? By just pressing D, A, W, and S. It's everything you have to do, okay? So this is basically what you need for moving the player, but it's a bit silly that the player is not rotating to whatever we want them to go. So because of this, we're going to stop this, we're going to save the scene, save the project, and go to the next video where we're going to rotate the player to the correct angle.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this course. If you want to watch the rest of the course, the link is down below. Not only will you get the access to this course, but you'll get access to a lot of other courses in a huge bundle, and it's on sale today. So buy it before the sale ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.